In this episode of Toolbox, we're talking about how much Python web developers should know. I'm trying out a new interview series I'm calling Toolbox Talks with Ronnie Sheer, who is in the chat room ready to answer your questions about Python, breaking into the industry, and all the full stack tools he uses. The pace of the web is relentless, and that's why you need the Toolbox. Hello, everyone. This is Ravi Jalobos, and I stream about front-end and full-stack tools Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Follow me and subscribe on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube for more content. If you want to watch any past episodes, make sure you take a look at my blog, rabo.org. Now, that's also where you'll see an article for today's episode, and that's where you can find all of the links that we're going to talk about today. And there's quite a few. Ronnie does get into a lot of the tools that he uses for his day-to-day work. So there is a lot more links than usual. So you can go to rabo.org and click on that. Now, I am doing a lot of new things, and there is a lot of new stuff coming. Now, the best way to keep up with me is through my LinkedIn profile, which you can get to at linkedin.com/in/planet of the web. Right now, it should have the stream in here. And if you hit this play icon, it should be playing that. Now, what you want to do, though, is you want to hit the notification icon, which is normally right here, but you can't see your own notification icon. So if I go to Ronnie's page, you can see the little notification icon right there. And I'm going to click that. And this way I'll get notified of any of his posts. So last week, my friends Morton, Simon, and I tried one of the new LinkedIn features, which is audio conversations. And we did this thing on the future of the front end, which was really awesome. It's sort of like a Clubhouse if you've done that before. So it's not just me talking, but people can come in on stage and participate and ask questions, sort of like this stream, but I can actually bring people on into not a video, but just the audio, and people can ask questions and chat with us live, which is pretty awesome. Now, if you go there right now, you can't really replay it, and it doesn't get recorded, which I sort of like. It's very much like a Clubhouse type of experience. So the conversations are more like spur of the moment, and everything is kept private. So for example, I was talking about how I'm over the CSS cascade. I'm really done with it. I want to use more utility frameworks, and some of the problems that I have with React and other frameworks. You can't hear that anymore until maybe we have another audio conversation. So I'll be doing some more of those. I really hope to do more of those soon. So make sure you click on that notification icon if you want to learn more. So over the years, I have met a ton of people on LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com. And I wanted to make this new thing called Toolbox Talks because I just really wanted to be able to talk to people about all kinds of different things, the sort of frameworks that they use. I really want to cover things like what stack they're familiar with and why did they pick this. And I think that we kind of, in doing all the courses, you sort of miss the ability to sort of talk to people and ask them questions about, what are they actually using for real? A lot of times we tend to cover like all the cutting edge stuff, but some of this other information I think could be really useful to everyone. And so I want to do more of those. So I created this new series called the Toolbox Talks. And I'm going to be playing a video of an interview that I had with Ronnie, and he's around in the chat, and you can ask him questions as we go through the conversation. And in the future, I hope to have more of those. Now, I did a poll on LinkedIn about a week and a half ago, and asking people what did they want me to cover. and I threw in a few things in there. I think clearly people want to learn a lot more about some of these new frameworks that I've been covering. So I've covered things like Remix, Astro, Solid.js, a lot of the sort of cutting edge new frameworks. Those kind of things are hard to do on LinkedIn Learning just because they're so new that it's hard to sort of justify an entire course on something that I'm not sure people would necessarily use, but I can cover them here. And I think you may see some of these shorter pieces of content that I've created in this stream show up in other places in the library. So that's pretty exciting to me. But it's clear that people really enjoy the frameworks and libraries. So I'll do more of those. The thing that came in last was web developer and news. Some people said they want to see an Elon versus Bezos boxing match. This is what I love about the web. And yeah, some people said all the above and CSS layers, like specific features. And I tend to comment to everything that gets posted. So, go ahead and ask away. I think that if you look at what was happening with, between tips and interviews with industry pros, which is actually what I voted on, they're pretty close, 22 and 23%. So I feel like you're going to get a lot out of this interview. I really enjoyed it. I always learn so much when I find out what other people are actually using in their day-to-day work. That's so useful. And also, I think a lot about breaking in and what to do, like how to approach your career. Those kind of things are almost like very individual to everyone. And I think that you can learn a lot from our approaches. Now, both Ronnie and I have non-technology degrees, like we have non-technology degrees. And so I think that's really, what do you do? How did you, make it as a professional with that sort of background? So that's part of what the interview is going to be. So let's just take a look at the interview. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. And then if you have any questions, we're going to do a Q&A at the end of the video, and you can ask any questions right now in the chat. Both of us are going to be there during this interview. So let's check it out. Ronnie Sheer is a full-stack software developer, speaker, and Python enthusiast. He's the head of research and development at Hiver, which is a platform for creating marketplaces. Now, he also developed applications that simplified and ran a Code for Change programming course at Ticonderoga High School. He has a master's degree in theater arts from Columbia University, New York, and now he's sharing his passion for Python with a wider audience as a LinkedIn Learning instructor. Hello, Ronnie.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, tell me a little bit about your story, how you got into the industry, and how you kind of got your start.
So I think about a decade ago now, like 10 years
Wow.
ago, I was a teacher at a high school and I was messing around with web applications, building little things to help me teach. And after a while, I thought I would develop like a platform and start this startup. And I told the principal that I was leaving. And he said, "Hey, I have a shortage in teachers. So what would make you stay?" And I said, if you, I can stay and teach programming through application development. I knew it was
Hmm.
a long shot, but I thought this would kind of hold me accountable and really step up. When you teach something, you have to learn it better. Then I signed up to speak at this conference, but not as a developer because I knew I didn't have much of a chance to. As a teacher, talking about ways of teaching Python. It was the local PyCon, and somebody was really impressed with my talk, and I came across this person later on in meetups, and eventually they introduced themselves as the VP R&D of a startup which was small back then. And he said, "Hey, do you want to come interview for us? I was impressed with your talk, the way you're thinking." And I really lucked out because the startup turned out to be this company Bluevine that really got huge, and the growth was enormous. So I got to work with incredible people, sort of learning and also experience different phases. You come in, it's like a few guys with energy drinks, and then it slowly evolved into this big corporate atmosphere. So that's a long story short.
That's pretty amazing. I think you touched on a lot of good points there, but one was that I think one of the best ways of learning something is to having to communicate it to somebody else, like having to teach it. Oftentimes, like when I'm doing courses, I feel like I know something, but it isn't until I have
Yeah.
to like write it all out and think about it. And what was it like before I knew this? So in that vein, like how would you suggest people go about when trying to decide like how to approach learning? It feels like you and I are pretty much, mostly self-taught or you kind of experientially. What sort of things would you tell people to look at when trying to decide on how to learn?
It's a great question. I think if you're building things that you use, then you've already won, right? Worst case scenario, you've made yourself a tool. As long as you keep the scope down and really start with little things that you can start and finish. I think there's a book called The Dip, and really identify that point when the learning gets tough. At first you're really excited, and I think a lot even later on in your career, always it's about identifying these points when you have to push harder, but you feel like very little, if any, progress is happening. This is where most people quit. And I feel like this is the magical point. And if you
Hmm.
can hack it so that you get your practice in, as far as the means of learning, I would say that for me at least, spending a few bucks on a course was helpful. You always have people say everything is available on YouTube, but I think that's the problem, that it's not very curated. So for me, I like having the ability to get the most out of my time. That said, you can dig through and find excellent tutorials.
Getting as quickly as possible to some sort of project where you're building
Yep,
something that can be useful. That's such a good point. People do have like different sort of styles of learning, and not everybody learns with
absolutely.
this. You remember in
Absolutely.
school, like you remember the one teacher. I had a teacher. His name was Mr. Schlein. Brought his pet dachshund to school every day. Sometimes people that speak to you or documentation that's well written in a certain way.
And then it just, you find that place where you get the most for your time, and then show up basically.
Hmm.
And set yourself super realistic goals. Sometimes just opening your IDE and typing something in, and that works. And also set yourself goals that are input based. I think a lot of times you say, I'll finish this application by this time, or
Hmm.
I'll finish this course by this time. That's not necessarily in your control. So, but saying I'll do 5 minutes a day, which will usually end up being 25 minutes a day, that
Hmm.
is input based, and you have control over that. So I find that to be super helpful, motivation wise.
Yeah, you also mentioned how like one of the ways that I learned is by giving myself tiny goals. Like when I watch a video, I usually write some notes. I don't wait a long time before digging into trying
Mm,
that piece of something. When I was watching your course on Git, I wanted to jump into a
mm,
terminal and then just try that command. Like go try it
awesome.
now because it'll reinforce like you're learning if you don't make notes about the things that have sort of spoken to you or the things that you think are going to be useful. If it's useful, you're going to try it even more. Making little goals, as you said, is really important. So, what about universities? Because I got a degree in journalism and you got a degree
Wow.
in theater arts. So, what do you think? What do you think about universities? What do you think they're good for, or where do you think that maybe somebody like us who can just pick it up can do well? Is that for
So,
everyone?
so I think everyone should get a degree in theater and then act like they know how to code or be a doctor. And then, no,
That's
I'm
good.
kidding. I think first of all, I think your situation varies, and I think if you are at a place where you're about to go into college and financially it works for you, I think a CS degree can take you super far. I
Hmm.
can't argue with that. And I think, you know, what I got in college, it just stretches you out. Just general education, having to take different classes and become a well-rounded person.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's super individual. I lucked out, and for me, I had this opportunity after opportunity. I also really didn't take it for granted. I really looked for things that perhaps are not as fun to learn that I felt
Hmm.
like I should be learning, um, like algorithm complexity
Hmm.
and things like that. And hey, I don't want people to get overwhelmed and now start immediately leaning into this. This is stuff that comes a little bit later on if you haven't gone to school. I'll say from my own experience, I've been approached by big companies. If going into a big company is what you want, know that a degree definitely can't hurt and probably helps a lot. But there must be I mean, if I've been approached by the MFANG style companies, there are probably openings there for people who don't have a CS degree.
Hmm.
Um, and I think another thing is just I would ill advise, try to not fall into the on the job training trap. I
Mm.
think maintain active learning and for everyone because it's very easy. You get overwhelmed. It's your job. But if you just do a tiny bit of learning, designate time for it, make calendar time for that. I actually have to tell people I work like for 2 hours on the weekend and just to get learning in
Hmm.
it does wonders, especially early on. But even, I still do. I still learn on weekends. I still take courses. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think having that attitude of this is a career where you're always going to be learning, it moves at a crazy pace, and you need to
Hmm.
have that attitude. Some people do really well just learning everything themselves, but some people appreciate learning things that they wouldn't teach themselves. As somebody who got a journalism degree, really focused on design, it was kind of a weird degree, journalism, but specializing in design. Uh, I now so much appreciate all the writing I had to do because English
Hmm.
isn't my first language. So I have to say that right now, 80% of my job is writing. And
Wow.
so I'm so happy that I had that foundation. And I also think that like school does another thing that I think is pretty interesting, especially if you're working to do well in school, and I think this is critical. You're going to get this thing where you're having to manage multiple classes, and if you have a job, you're going to learn how to study. It almost teaches you
Hmm.
how to study and how to organize and how to prep.
Absolutely.
And I think that that is something that is really important. And if you come from, like high school, or maybe you didn't have that, or you maybe weren't as good a student, I think that that structure is, I'm not sure that it's exactly the same, but that overwhelming amount of stuff and having to be responsible for a lot of things kind of maybe prepares you a little bit for the type of things that you'll be doing in the future. And then, there's courses like public speaking that you don't think are going to be useful at all. And you may, the ability to have electives. I think it's a good thing for some people. Some people that know exactly what they want, maybe like a boot camp or maybe like self learning, but not everybody is the same. And I think that it's important for people to have that sort of attitude of flexibility. So,
I couldn't agree more. And I think one thing that I think if it's hard to miss in college is critical thinking. And if
hmm.
there's one skill that I think people should lean into that's not coding related,
Hmm.
it's critical thinking, especially nowadays, and knowing to curate your source of information, whether it's about JavaScript or about, whatever. I
Hmm.
think that will serve you for life, basically.
Even the I think like the writing like term papers and the
Oh, yeah,
documents, like
absolutely.
that stuff
Getting your
you
practice
really
in for
yeah,
sure.
it's more useful. It's shocking how many classes I thought were more useful after I got out of school than
Yep.
while I was in school. Like, why am I taking this? I had to. So as a non-native speaker, in high school, I had to take a lot of English and a lot of writing. And then I went to school and I got a journalism degree, and it was like even more writing. And now I'm like, I wish I would
Is
have paid
anybody
more
reading this
attention.
stuff?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Who cares about all? I'm never going to be writing. I'm going to be designing things. And then it was so useful that I'm like, I should have paid more attention to all that stuff that they were trying to teach me. So
It's
that
like the
that
two
surely
things. It's
happened.
like it's like college, all of a sudden things become useful way after the fact, and
Right.
your
It's so
parents
weird.
become super smart once you
I
start
know.
having kids
Also true.
understand. I had to take a science class in undergrad, and I took a class, and somebody told me take this epidemiology class. It's like about the biology of epidemics, and I was like, oh man, what am I doing here? And all of a sudden, the last 2 years, my wife is like, where do you know all this stuff from? How do you know this thing? How do you
That's
know
great.
like
That's
what
great.
argot is? And I'm like, hey, somehow these things fall,
Yeah.
together later in life. Yeah.
That's super. So talking about that, knowing now, what you maybe you should have known in school. So what you tell people was important to having a successful career now that maybe you didn't know when you were younger.
So I would, as far as soft skills, I would say leaning into the dip. I would
Hmm.
say being once again, I couldn't say more like super nice to people at all levels.
Hmm.
I think I've heard someone recently say something about networking happens here way more than it happens when you go to meet the president of something,
Hmm.
and really work on these friendships. I think when it comes to software development, look around you, look where there's work, and start aiming. Now, this is very rapidly moving, so it's very hard to recommend technologies because by the time people learn them, things shift.
Hmm.
But in the decade of programming, I never woke up and said, "Gosh, I wish I didn't know Git as well. I wish I wish I didn't know JavaScript as well." I think look at these things, and also a lot of times, what I like about, by the way, your courses is that if you do a lot of these project-based courses, a lot of these framework courses, uh, something happens when you start pattern matching. So
Hmm.
I would definitely also say, even though by the time you finish, your React, who knows what course, this comes out and that,
Hmm.
uh, it's okay. I think that information overflow can be fine as long as you don't overdo it.
Hmm.
And definitely, yeah, small projects. So for
Yeah, I think
sure.
it's like the ideas to me are the more important thing, and that's why when I made this series of the toolbox and that we're doing right now, my concept
Yeah.
was I know that I can spend a lot of time like learning these esoteric frameworks and tools, and people don't have time
Hmm.
for that necessarily. But I think what's important is understanding why a specific idea is useful.
Is
And
useful. Yeah,
it's
for
it's
sure.
like when you go you go fix something and you grab like a flathead screwdriver, but
Yep.
it's like a Phillips, and you can do it, but it's just not exactly the best. And sometimes it's being aware that there's something else out there that is maybe a little bit more useful or better suited
Absolutely.
for the job. And this brings me into
And getting
one
that.
of the topics today, like Python versus JavaScript. Looking at
Mm.
that course that you did, Python for JavaScript developers, I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
I've heard about Python. I understand that it's like really well liked in data and AI. But yeah, tell me a little bit about your stack. Like, what do you use on a project today? What sort of things are you sort of working with?
So I think, and I'll just go back to one more thing I wanted to say
Oh,
about
sure.
career, and it's the
Hmm.
one backer. Like, try your best, try this once. Like, when you're marketing yourself at any point in your career, market potential.
Hmm.
Like, don't fake it till you make it, because in software development, the worst thing that can happen is that you fake it and then you make it and then you show up ill-equipped. Your advantage as a beginner, if you're watching this, is the fact that people love taking chances on people
Hmm.
and being part of these success stories. So lean into that, sell your potential. I'm sorry, and then I'll hop onto
No,
the
that's
stack
actually
stuff.
that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I think the other
Uh,
last piece of advice that I'll give is, um, you know, always try to see the other person's point of view, even if
yeah,
it's just to prove them wrong.
for
Like I
sure.
always say, even if you just want to prove somebody that they're wrong about
Yeah,
something, listen to what they say and then try it, and then because you'll
especially
be
early on.
surprised.
Yeah,
You'll be surprised how oftentimes it's you who are wrong, but give that a shot. So cool.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
talk about technology
How
now.
about
Like
the
what kind
stack?
of
For sure.
yeah, what kind of
So
stuff are
I'll
you into now?
say, I think these days, if I start a project, I'll talk about front end first. I
Hmm.
like to go with Vue.js at the moment.
Hmm.
I know Svelte is really picking up, and I want to see where that's going,
Hmm.
especially because I hear great things about it through your show, and I've seen some awesome examples. The reason today I would pick Vue.js, and these things probably age not so well, is because when you're building a team, if somebody's coming from Angular, they're going to have a pretty easy time transitioning into Vue.js.
Hmm.
If someone's coming from React, they're probably not going to have a tough learning curve. So it's a nice place of productivity in the middle. And in general, if somebody's just a developer, I think the learning curve is very nice. And then there's a fact that this is not a rule, but this is something that I think contributed to the success of Vue. I think the
Hmm.
fact that it grew out of community and
Hmm.
not necessarily as a side effect of a large company's need. Like I think sometimes companies kind of adopt open source and that's great, but I think that strengthens it because you know that a lot of times a company kind of supports something and all of a sudden a massive amount of effort is
Hmm.
withdrawn and the developers are sort of left to pick up the pieces. And I think that's a start, a really strong thing with Vue. I
Hmm.
like this framework called Vuetify. It lets you kind of
Yeah.
build these material components, very productive, super stable. I'm dying to transition to Vite. It just wasn't. It was quite better when we were putting together our stack.
Hmm.
And then there's for web backend stuff, we use, I like to use like Django,
Hmm.
Python. Node.js, I like using in a serverless stack. I kind of like it because, it's super nice if you do Lambda functions, if you do cloud functions. I like the scope of having sort of everything wrapped up and being able to use JavaScript. Um, and I guess, did I miss anything? Yeah,
No,
we
that
do
that's
like
a
there's, yeah,
That's
quite a
pretty
bit.
solid. I mean, I liked, I did, before I really got into, I guess, Svelte a lot. I mean, I really loved Vue, and it was that it made immediate sense. Whereas, like, I think React is getting more and more complicated, and I think that
Yeah.
what I don't like sometimes about frameworks is when they get too, there's too much jargon involved in the framework. So once
Huh.
they started talking about like hooks, and the hooks do like these, and then there's suspense, and I think that, you know, that's one of the things that appeal to me about Svelte in the same way is that it just feels like you're writing JavaScript. It's
Yeah.
pretty super easy to get started, and it's yet super powerful. And having worked at newspapers, I understand that they came from, I think, the New York Times is where Rich Harris developed that platform. So I
Oh, I
can
didn't know
really
that.
relate to like just the thing about newspapers
Wow.
is that they happen every day, and it's a very fast turnaround for getting things done. So it really appealed to me in a number of different
Huh.
ways. So I mean, but I love Vue. Again,
Actually,
simplicity.
you bring up a point that I didn't know that Svelte came from the New York Times.
Mhm.
Django came from a
You're right.
small newspaper. And
That's
then
right.
Backbone, I don't know if it was developed, but Jeremy Ashkenazi, I think, was a New York Times developer. Pretty awesome developer tools come from newspapers. And
Yeah,
that's
because they
interesting
have to get,
stuff.
having worked at a newspaper where we did like a daily, it's just such a fast pace. It's like, I don't know if you've ever seen Battlestar Galactica. They have an episode, I think it was the first episode that broadcast called 33.
Yeah.
And it was like, I think it was called 33. And like they got attacked by the Cylons every 33 minutes. And it wasn't like, whatever the time frame was, it wasn't long enough for them to like take a nap or anything. So it felt like, once they got attacked again and they
Rapid.
were able to jump, they had to like get started again immediately. They had to like service all the
Yep.
spaceships. They knew how long they had, and that's what it feels like working at a newspaper. Like, okay, we're done with
Wow.
yesterday's edition. It's put to bed. Now we need to move on to the next thing, and it's the machine starts, and it has
Super
very
fast.
definite sort of deadlines. Yeah, and so you really have to get going fast. So that's what I think a lot of great stuff comes from
Wow.
that
I didn't know.
structure.
I
So
just realized that now. Yeah. Amazing.
yeah. So Rich
Yeah.
Harris, yeah, and a lot of those people are now getting hired by companies to work for them. So Rich Harris was hired by Vercel, and
Hmm.
then a bunch of other people have been hired to
Yeah.
work full time as open source developers. So that's pretty interesting. So
Intel.
I
Yeah.
really I went through your course called Eight Commands That You Should Know, and I thought it was interesting. First of all, because I think you did more than eight commands. Because I was trying to write them down, and I was going,
It's
okay, there's a lot more than eight here.
it's
So
funny. You finalize the title, and then you're like, one more thing.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah.
that was great. I appreciated getting more than eight. But how did you like on something Git? I always think of Git as being something that nobody really knows because it's so big and there's so many like kind of like tips and tricks and special things
Yeah.
about it. So how did you originally come up and maybe you can tell me what the eight originally were or where you were going. And but
Wow.
there's
It
so
got
much good stuff in there.
So I think it's weird when you one thing that I realized that when you work in different companies, sometimes you're pair programming or doing like a live code review, and somebody does something tools related or programming, and you're like, "What? What'd you do here?" Right? And then you kind of learn this, and then somebody else sees you doing it, and you're like, oh, "Wow, what's that?" And and for me, with Git, there are quite a few of these, and I thought to myself, if I'd known like these few commands earlier on, that would have saved me some time. And I think
Yes.
that a lot of because a lot of times early on, you end up deleting quite a bit of code just to
Yeah.
fix messes that happen. And you know, like the amount of times early on that you do git reset dash dash hard, and you're like, okay, I'll just write it over. Um, and so, to be honest, we were talking through, and I thought, wow, there's this dash p argument that lets
Yeah.
you see, like diff by diff that you're about to commit. That saved me so much time. Like I've committed breakpoints, and
Yeah.
then somebody's like, great code, but why did you commit a breakpoint? Like, why
Right.
did you put debugger statement in this? And so, and there's amending and things like that that I thought deserved a course. And
Hmm.
making a list out of it is not necessarily enough because there's some explaining as to when do you unravel a commit. Some things are more and less appropriate when you've already pushed code.
Hmm.
And I thought it deserved that chance. And
Yeah, now you need
so
to make
it's
like
a yeah.
eight, like another eight things that you need to know. Like I think that should be the next one.
Yeah,
I
I'm
learned a lot. Like I liked I like you explained like oh my seashell, which is a fantastic tool. Like the git log one line is fantastic, and the
yeah.
graph is really awesome. You explain hooks, the
Mm.
reset command, the push. I mean, all extremely useful stuff. So I highly recommend you guys. I'll
Check
make
it
sure
out,
that
and you get
yeah,
and
it's
you get
really good
like
stuff.
12 for the price of 8 or
Yeah,
something like
exactly. It's
this.
like a half off
If you
sale
think within
going
the
on.
next 24 hours, we'll throw in 4 more commands. You didn't
That's
know.
that's great. So all right, so let's talk about Python because I think you do a lot
Yeah,
of
for
stuff
sure.
with Python. What do you think makes it so compelling for people,
Uh, for
Python?
sure. So I'm going to talk, and I know that I'm actually in this show, like I'll probably use the word framework for everything now. Okay.
That's
And I
fine. Yeah,
know that
I'm.
framework
Yeah, no.
library is like a
Let's.
serious thing. It's almost like semicolons. So
Oh,
like
tabs. Yeah.
I'll go to the framework to get a book later on. Okay. So just to get
I
this
loved
out
how
of
in
the
the
way.
episode you talked about I don't know which course that was, but I love that you brought up the Silicon Valley, the girlfriend with the tabs versus spaces where she's making him
Yeah.
angry.
So,
Great episode, but
wow,
yeah.
we really have a lot of time in our hands
So
here.
yeah, I
There's
always
all these things.
actually get pretty upset with the frameworks questions. For me, like a framework is just a structure that you're using to make
Yeah,
your life simple. You follow the structure and it does a certain amount of utility things for you. I know about inversion of control, but it's not really to me that important when it
for
comes to
sure.
it's just easier to call them all frameworks. So I'm all good with that. I'm down.
So I think maybe yeah, I'll try and if people are angry, you've
Yeah,
gone
yeah.
far when people
Like
are like, "Oh, Sammy, go in here," and
yeah,
but
I got a great comment today on YouTube. Somebody saying, "Bro, this is just like beginner stuff," and I was like, "Oh man,
wow,
I want to reply, but I'm not going to because they don't deserve a reply." But
yeah,
it was hilarious. Anyways, go ahead.
like
Sorry to
okay, so I think so Python has this amazing learning curve because it was created with the idea that a computer and a programming language is there to serve a developer and not vice versa. And at the time, it was quite revolutionary because low-level languages were starting. We we were having much different atmosphere back then, and the creator of Python wanted to make it about the developer. And when you look at Python, it almost reads like English sometimes, which is great. And I think because of that, it's become like the language of non-programmers. you can
Mhm.
spend a lifetime mastering it. It will throw more patterns and tools and libraries and endless kind of things that you can, uh, improve upon and you can master. And so you have applications that people don't realize are implemented in Python. I
Mhm.
mean, Instagram was implemented originally in Django, which is
Mm.
pretty impressive. But what's even more impressive is that many parts of it still use Django,
Mm.
whereas
Wow.
other frameworks are often, kind of, you have like, I think Twitter was quickly prototyped or created in Ruby on Rails, but
Mm.
it outgrew it. Whereas Django, for instance, is quite scalable and they still have components, I think, last time I checked,
Mhm.
which are Django based. So I think it's a super, super productive language to know. And of course, if you're in data science, it's a must, right? And you have an ecosystem of libraries, but it's almost like a different one. They have their own package management system and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I really loved its simplicity. I was going through your courses again, and one of the things that this was brilliant, where you sort of listed all the different ways of doing something in JavaScript, and then you're like, okay, there's
Hmm.
like one way of doing this in
Yeah.
Python, and it's like so well done that you don't realize how often like JavaScript they just add something, and it's like the same way you've done everything before, but now it's like a little bit better. And so I think that when I was looking at your Python code, it kind of reminded me like it's sort of a combination of like bash
Yeah.
scripting plus like Ruby on Rails that I took in like college,
Hmm.
and some of these other things that are just for getting things done, and that sort of well designed programming language that doesn't really need to change because it sort of, approach things, I don't want to say properly, but well when it began,
Hmm.
and it doesn't
Yeah.
really change. I think that was super appealing. And I could see like, very strictly typed so that when you're
Mm.
dealing with different data types, you're not wondering, what is it that I'm getting now? Is it going to be a string? Do I need to cast it back into like something? And that ability to handle numbers. I could see where that is really good for data science and AI type things.
So yeah, type hints. Now we have the ability to actually leverage both. So we can
Mhm.
add these type hints and have them checked, and we have these powerful decimal types that are more less error prone. I think also people should know, and this is I love JavaScript. I think it's so misunderstood. Before people, I don't want to upset anyone. JavaScript has to run in so many places that are out of our hands, right?
Mhm.
And I think with that, it's impossible to deprecate things sometimes. For example, not many people know that, but if I'm not mistaken, Brandon Ike wanted to get rid of the double equals and have it do what the three equal signs do
Mhm.
in comparisons. But it wasn't a possibility anymore because it had to have support retroactively. So you have a language which has to deal with these challenges, which has to be much more, of a consensus. Um, and you'll find that. And I mean, we just recently found out that one of our products was running in these very slow connectivity places, in these really old browsers. We had to go jQuery Lite again, And I thought jQuery was out of my life, and I thought jQuery was laughing at me, like, you thought you were rid of it. But I think one of the reasons for jQuery to be so successful is, and I think TypeScript is because JavaScript has to deal with a lot of these challenges of having to run, not just in many scenarios, but in many places that are outside of our control, meaning
That's true.
different browsers. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, really. And what are your thoughts? Have you seen PyScript at all? I mean, what do you think about that? I know that I just saw sort of a couple of articles about it. So, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think as far as there are benefits to having things run, having Python run in the browser. There's a thing called Jupyter Notebooks. It lets you run pieces of code and annotate it with Markdown. And I think that's super useful, right? If you can have that as a browser application, To write web apps in Python, I don't see Python replacing JavaScript for browser-based application anytime soon. I think because the ecosystem is just there, and so if you're a Python developer, I think knowing JavaScript is super important. I think most
Yeah,
developers should
maybe
know
trying to
JavaScript.
do too many things in one language, like maybe let the languages, that let the
Yeah,
things that they're really good for. Like, I know if I was processing a lot of data in the back end, that's a great place for
yeah.
Python. But if I'm doing a lot of front end stuff, maybe something that is just specialized for that would be better. You did mention Django as a good framework. I've heard of Flask before. Is there like a lot of sort of things like that available?
So I think I think Django is awesome if you're trying to take care of your backend, and Django with this add-on Django REST framework
Hmm.
means you can super rapidly develop really robust backends for your web applications. So if you want to create a project that has users, learning Django will supercharge your ability to build that. You define your data, and you immediately have this admin that allows you to input data. So if you're working a startup per se, and you know that your users are going to be, I don't know, documenting cars, I don't know, then you define your car, and you can have your back office team immediately start to type in, to feed the database, which is
Mm,
amazing. And the patterns, the defaults of Django are pretty darn secure.
mm.
And a lot of the boilerplate of having users and hashing their passwords is just there. So I think Django is great. Flask is a great learning tool. You get, 3, 4 lines and you have a little web application going. If
Wow.
you're making little microservices, you're good. And learning Flask, you're going to, grab a beer, grab a Coca-Cola, grab something and learn, those few lines, and you can do some fun stuff.
And you also mentioned
And
Jupyter Notebooks as being something that's really, really popular.
yeah, it's super fun because it's like it's not hiding the fact that there's code. So if you're
Hmm.
doing like if I actually do sometimes like personal finance stuff with Jupyter notebooks. If
Wow.
you have thought about, wow, I could write a function to do this, and that's, hey, if for some people that's better than Excel. Um, and so people do that kind of stuff, graphs, data science. I think Jupyter notebooks are amazing. There's an up and comer called Fast API, a framework. Somehow they managed to make it super fast, faster than a lot of things that are not in Python. It's asynchronous, concurrent, and it's now starting to gain stability, basically.
Hmm.
Very good. And then there's a fun one. If you want to start do your own CLIs, command line tools, there's one called Click.
Hmm.
And you can get colors and those like, progress bars and have fun. I've done stuff in the past where I didn't like checking the Scrum cards. So I created like an entire CLI for Scrum where I type in a command, I see what's today's like Scrum cards and stuff like that. It was super fun. Like it hit up, I think, the Jira API, gave me my daily tasks,
Hmm.
another like argument, pull requests. That's if you want to like super geek out. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of it sounds like a lot of fun actually. Like anything that can replace Excel for me is like a good thing because sometimes it's so
Yeah.
frustrating to have to go to the, now the browser, but just open up a different app. And sometimes you just want to solve problems. And it feels like that's what Jupyter Notebooks kind of allows you to do, is like solve a quick problem. I know when I was working in the newspaper, a lot of times what we really needed was just queries. It's like being able to query
Yeah.
like our large database of content and retrieve certain data. We had a whole like data department that would just sit there and analyze like data from like the police or publicly available
Wow.
data like from the library. Like all that stuff is something that you do a lot in newspapers because you're trying to get data for like the graphics team to develop
For
like their
sure.
their infographics and stuff like that. So I imagine if they had that, they would have really enjoyed that. So what sort of other things are you kind of excited about like for the future?
My team and I had access to Copilot,
Hmm.
and there's actually a course on the library called, the First Look course on Copilot. And I don't know, for you, has it been a game changer? Because for me, it's been it's mind blowing. I haven't seen anything like that.
I'm super impressed that it makes you a little bit scared about being a
Yeah,
programmer, but you can tell that it's, just like anything new, I think that you can tell that it isn't going to really replace you, but it's just going to
for
make it
sure.
easier for you. I remember I saw that course and I was looking at how, you kind of told it what you wanted to do and then you said, well, this actually needs to be over here. So you still have
Yeah,
to know what you're doing. It's going to give you a lot of things that you would have to maybe look up
for sure.
in Stack Overflow, but unless you know what you're doing, you can really screw things up.
Yeah. And I think there's
So,
like high level, a lot of this is like the high level stuff. This is where I think we're going. Like,
mhm,
you'll have to think more about patterns and design. And I think maybe a lot of the times, like, okay, so you won't have to rewrite a lot of things. A lot of times, like, if you reformat something, a long JSON file, this really helps. Um,
yeah,
and
like you
then
said,
there's like,
there's about 10 different ways of doing the same thing in JavaScript. So it's
yeah,
like you said, kind of tells you
it's
like
good. Give
there's a few
it.
different options, so especially good for JavaScript, I can tell you.
And I'll say if you're a student and you have access to it, which you will now because they're
Yeah,
opening
it's
it
been
up,
made free. That's right.
do turn it off like once in a while. Like, because sometimes like just getting your hours in, I think it's important.
Hmm.
Or better yet, if you're getting a suggestion, maybe try to type it in. I don't know. That's my thought. And then that brings me to OpenAI stuff, like the
Hmm.
underlying algorithm GPT-3, which have been messing around with. And that stuff, you just have to ignore the scary bit, right? The next generation of GPT is probably going to listen to this live cast. It's not an entirely open source technology. The
Yeah.
model is a proprietary model. And I have a quick story. Like, friends of mine and I were hanging out in a coffee shop at one point, like a few years back. This is on my honeymoon, and this guy heard us speaking and he said, hey guys, I started like small talking with us, and he said, I'm working on this really interesting project where we are researching how to make AI less dangerous to people. And we were like, okay, interesting stuff, kind of walked away. You don't hear this every year, like, oh,
Yeah.
well, okay.
Yeah. What
And
bar
then
were you in? I mean, that's great. Where do
this
you
is like
frequent?
in a coffee in a coffee shop in like
Oh, that's something.
in California. Like, these things
Yeah.
happen, like in San Francisco. Also,
Mhm.
he was speaking like our language, so
Mm.
he introduced, and we were like, wow, this conversation, I don't know where it can go, but interesting. Now a few years later, there's talk about GPT-3, etc. stuff, and I see the panelists of the creators of GPT-3, and I'm like, that's the guy. And so I went to Wikipedia, and it turned out that OpenAI was a not for profit that was meant to
Yeah.
research safe AI that turned into a for profit organization. This is just still with the intent of safe AI research. So that goes to show, be nice to everybody,
Yeah.
no matter, yeah.
Well, I think that
Uh,
brings us back to your beginnings, like the fact that you were somewhere, you saw something that appealed to you, and you realized the power of that opportunity, and you made it
yeah,
work for you. You talked to
yeah,
your boss, and you said, "Hey, how can I just do this full time?" Like, and you just
yeah,
dove into it. Like that is to me the number one thing maybe that you should get out of this. Like, be ready because there's a lot of these opportunities that are happening, and you can resist, but resistance is futile for one, as Star Trek people would tell you, but also that you're not gonna win against some of the technologies. You have to kind of embrace them and see what you can do with it. And I think that
for sure.
successful people and companies are going to be the ones that can leverage some of the amazing stuff that's happening. That type of technology is now everywhere. It's in
Mm,
graphic generation, it's in code generation and writing. It's really helpful for me as a
absolutely.
non-native speaker. Sometimes when I'm typing things in, that it tells me what a decent sentence would be, and sometimes it'll correct like the things that I have as problems in writing and stuff. So I think it's good, and we just need to figure out how to take the best advantage of those type of opportunities, which is I think where you came from. Yeah, how can somebody
Yeah,
find you, or
I wanted
what do you
to.
want to say?
So I'm on LinkedIn. That's like the main platform. Look me up. I just want to say something. There's a bit of a shift going on in tech at the time of this recording. And that's going to influence some people. And maybe I was thinking of saying this because there might be like one person that's watching this show that's going through this right now. And you spend enough time in tech, every few years, you or someone you love experience layoffs, right? Or
Mm,
someone you care about. I experienced like a layoff one time along with a big chunk of a company, like literally over 20% of the company. And I'll say like at the time it's like super stressful. Um, but in all likelihood, for me at least, it was like a really good thing that happened.
mm,
And in all likelihood, for you, it's likely to be a good thing. But I'll say the exception for me was a lot of the stress and sort of like the upset and all that and blame, etc. And that's sort of self-inflicted. So if there's like one person right now with what's going on in tech with the shifts, some companies are hiring more, some are really struggling. I would say like breathe
mm,
because likely the one thing that you will have regretted was kind of the stress and the anger. And these things come and go in tech. It's just part of the world we're in.
that's
So
so true.
maybe that could bring. And I just said that because I think there's a bit of shame that goes with that stuff, and
Yeah.
I think it's like self perpetuating. So it was important for me to say.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I mean, I think that I've always said that, like in my life, like, challenges always happen. And I think that everybody knows how to behave when things are going great. It's a party, right?
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
what happens when things aren't going great that kind of defines, what your future is going to be like. And actually you need those things to help push you
Yeah.
along. So if you're experiencing that sort of time of trouble, know that there's help out there. There's also people that
Mhm.
you can talk to like us and people that have gone through that stuff as well. But we can tell you that sometimes like when I didn't get that job, later on I was so happy I didn't get
Yeah.
that job because there was something
Yeah.
so much better. And I feel like being in a protected environment sometimes prevents you from
Absolutely.
pushing yourself out of it. And I think that that experience really does in the end make you stronger. So hopefully that'll help somebody. So I appreciate your time, Ronnie. Thank you so much for
Thank you
talking to
so
me.
much, Ray. I
It's
appreciate it.
amazing, amazing, the interview. So thank you again. And we'll talk to you again. I'll make
Appreciate
sure
it.
that I add all the links everywhere and take care. So that was the interview, and super cool. I remember watching the interview, editing it, and yet I feel like I still learned something. So I'm gonna bring in Ronnie if I can. Let's see if we can do this. Hey Ronnie,
Hey,
how's it
can you
going?
hear me?
Yeah, this is awesome. I learned something
Yeah, it was
from
fun to
watching that
watch.
again. Isn't that something? Like I learned that you committed a breakpoint. What?
Yeah, for sure.
So I was like,
I hope
what?
I could
I totally
unlearn
missed
the
that.
fact that I
Yeah,
committed a break point.
yeah. So yeah, that was interesting. I mean, a lot of the stuff you said was so cool. I did want to mention something that we talked about in the episode, but we didn't get to. And that is that there is that code. I guess Copilot is actually officially launched
Pilot,
now.
yep.
So just I think
It's out
yesterday they
and
announced it.
yeah, it's out. You can try it for free, probably without your credit card too,
Hmm.
which is nice for I think 60 days, very generous.
Hmm.
And we have a fun little course for you to try it out as well,
Yeah.
to get the most out of it. I've been using it for about 8 months now, which is a long time in Copilot years.
Hmm. Yeah, it's actually I really have enjoyed it. I mean, I think it's a little pricey, $10 a month or $100 a year. That's on top of
Yep.
like say your GitHub Pro subscription. But if you've been trying it and it's really enjoyable, like it's hard for me. It's going to be I'm definitely, I mean, I'm paying for it. Thankfully, my company, I think will maybe pick up the bill. But I think that whatchamacallit, it was really worthwhile, and I feel like I would have withdrawal if I try to code without it now. Like it really
Absolutely.
got me out of a couple binds, and I think just like the suggestions, being able to see kind of some of the options, I think was pretty cool. So I just want to
Super
mention that it
smart.
was out. Yeah, so we do have some questions that people ask, so I wanted to maybe bring them in, and also if you do have any
Awesome.
questions, make sure that you add them. So I'll just go from the top. And I think you answered some of these, but I'll bring some of these in. And I'm trying. So Daniel says that he has a university degree, but nobody even asked for it. I wonder if that's like common now. What do you think? Are people not no longer
When I
asking for these
interview
things?
people, it's interesting. Like well, it seems like maybe it's on your resume and people see it, so there's less of a need to ask for it. I don't recall like asking people
Hmm.
explicitly, but I'll notice it when I interview folks and they have them. And I think it's definitely a plus when I see it. It shows that you have the ability to commit and finish things. It's not a deal breaker if you don't, but it's nice to see.
Yeah, I think it's also nice, like if somebody does a good job in school, like if you're gonna get one, make sure that you perform well. It's nice if like I know the first time I went and I got my journalism degree, I was
Yeah,
not a great student. I went back and I got a master's in web development, and I did well because I really focused on. I didn't want to do poorly, so I think that that does make a difference. And I think like what we talked about, how it really makes you explore things that you maybe didn't know you needed. Public speaking is a
yep,
great example. Like, how often do you need that when you're just doing a presentation for somebody? Like, learning how to not be nervous, learning how to organize your thoughts in a way that,
definitely.
is useful for consumption. All that stuff was pretty cool. So let's see. Yeah, I mean, Sudansu says he would love to learn more by doing projects. Such a great point. Great points that you made on that. Like, that's how I
For
learned.
sure.
That's why if you look at my courses, there are a lot of project-based courses, and I think you
Yep.
mentioned that.
And I recommend. I actually I like taking Ray's courses for that reason. Actually, because you get hands-on experience, and in a
Mhm.
sense, you pick up on patterns. So I this is I remember actually taking an Angular 1 course when I was transitioning from jQuery to Angular 1 by
Mhm.
Ray. But over the time, you take that, you take Vue, you start pattern matching, and you learn nice kind of subtleties, and you learn what's beyond the
Mhm.
framework, I think. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think that I tend to, I mean, I don't know, I feel like maybe you do some of this as well, but I tend to sort of teach in the same way that I learn. Like, I feel like if I don't show people, how I would like to learn, then maybe they won't learn because I enjoy seeing how a realistic type project, it doesn't have to be real,
Yeah.
but a realistic project has some of the connections that I feel are lacking from when you just look at somebody from a conceptual, that's teaching from a conceptual standpoint. Like, you forget that things actually, what happens, how do you add a module, like a node module into like React? Like, what is that like? If you're just learning React and you forget that there's like connections that you have to make, I think that it's not for me anyways. It's not as good an experience because then you try to do it and you're like, I have no idea how to make those connections. So that's pretty important for me. So
Yeah,
let's.
I'm lecturing at a conference next week, and
Mhm,
when I lecture, I try to create a project so we can
mhm,
dive into code. I'm
mhm.
actually lecturing on GPT-3,
Oh,
and
awesome.
I let GPT-3 write the proposal for the conference lecture,
That's great.
and then the summary for it. And then it's a big mess. And then I created an app called Docs to Talks that takes the documentation and turns it into a talk proposal. So
Oh,
I'll
that's
be kind
awesome.
of demoing how to. So you give it like Vue is a front end component framework, and then it tells you this talk will teach you everything you need to know about Vue, which is a component. Yeah. So
That's
yeah.
awesome. Wow, I really need to see how you do that. So another question that came up was really interesting conversation, and somebody has to drop off, and they want to know if this stuff is going to be available. So yes, if you just go to the rabo.org website, you can get all of the documentation from there. I mean, sorry, just the talk. So there's going to be the entire thing that we're doing right now, which is the live stream. This is the top article. And then the second one is just the talk part. that
Cool.
just the interview part. So you can go to either one of those. I know that somebody mentioned that they were having some problems with audio. I wasn't getting anything, but that's definitely a recording that I've looked at. So maybe just going direct to this Toolbox talk will show you a higher resolution version of the talk if you need that later on. And also, like I said, you are probably, I mean, I feel like I've watched this thing 4 times already, and I'm picking little things up, like committing the breakpoint now. So, that's good stuff. All right,
Yeah.
let's see. Let's
Mistake that
see.
I've made, so you don't have to. That's the way
That's
I
right.
present this to my students.
Yes, yes. I mean, trust me, I've made plenty. So I don't know if you've heard. Eddie says Spider is also good for block running. I'm not familiar with this, so we'll have to look
Not
that
so
up.
much.
Yeah,
We'll
we'll have
check
to
it
check
out.
that out. That's I
Yeah,
love new tools, so that's cool. And then Corey
curious.
said that his switch from React to Svelte, so he's egging you on. Ronnie, I know you said that
Nice. Very
you
nice, Corey.
looked at it. Yeah, I really like it. I love Vue though, so I'm right with you. I'm gonna go back into Vue, and it's I like what you said about the project being kind of a grassroots project.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that I really loved about React. Although I did meet somebody from the React team at a conference, and I remember asking them how, like, when they make changes to React, they're very careful
Mm.
about not killing everything that people have done.
Yeah,
And
that sounds like something that's happened in a certain
yeah,
framework
yeah,
that
that's
they have
right,
like a
that's right.
gazillion breaking change. I can't recall which one.
Yes, yes. That would be
Um,
my Nemesis Angular 1 to 2 was like
yeah,
a disaster. But
yeah.
I do remember talking to them about this. And what was really interesting is that they said that, well, the thing is, if we make a break and change, we're responsible
Mm.
for managing about 17,000 applications,
Wow.
the Facebook team. So if we make a break and change, we got to go fix 17,000
They're
things.
in.
So we're
Yeah,
very careful. And I thought that was like brilliant. Like make yourself dog food the things that you create. I always
absolutely.
said at the newspaper that if the developers would come work at with the things that they built, they would build a completely different thing. And it would be so much better if we just made
Mm,
them use them for a week. But I think sometimes like developers forget to kind of use the things that they're building. And so they kind of build whatever is cooler. Like you
for
remember
sure.
eons ago, like the search engines had like 9,000 options. Like you had to click,
Oh
drop
yeah.
downs, and now it's like a search box. Like you just type in what you want, and it's so much
Hmm.
better when it's simpler because people have used stuff before. So yeah, that
And people get used to it. And actually, also in teams, if you get the developers doing some of the QA stuff,
mhm,
that actually tends to improve because people understand and kind of own up to what they do. So I've always
mhm.
had, in all scales of companies and teams, to have developers do firsthand quality assurance work really kind of creates a bond between the developer and what it is they're doing, I think, through and
So
through.
true. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
working with my father-in-law on a shed, and he was like he's super smart. He was doing some electricity work, and he's like
Wow.
having me hold the flashlight. And he said, when I was learning, that's all I did for the first like 5 weeks. All I did was hold a
Wow.
flashlight. Like that's all the. And then as he, because I asked him, where did you learn how like to do this electricity work? He's a
Yeah.
mechanical engineer. And he said, well, I
Okay.
joined this company and I showed up with a suit the first day and they said, you can't wear that. And he's like, why? Well,
You're
that's
holding a
not what you're going to
flashlight.
do. Yeah, exactly. You're not only holding a flashlight, but you're working in the field. And before you do
Mm.
any mechanical engineer, you're going to go work all the jobs. And he said he went through like plumbing, like he went to, he worked with the framing
Wow.
people, he worked with the electricians. And after that, that's when he started to work on engineering because then he had a real understanding of
You have
like
a
the
solid
real world.
grasp of what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the
It's
equivalent
a
of that
great
on
point.
on the web. I don't know what it is, but I think some of the things that you mentioned as well. So also from Corin, critical thinking is such an important skill. Totally agree. Yeah,
For sure.
people. I mean that's such a great thing that you get from college that sometimes you think so many of those courses. I think what were some of the weird, interesting courses that I took? I remember taking a course on film in college that I thought, oh,
And
this
it
will
got
be
you
just
kind
like
of
a
thinking
great.
about, yeah,
Yeah,
wow.
I learned so much just about like the structure of a story, and it's so useful for things that I didn't think. Communicating a lot of times,
Sure.
if you make it a story and you understand that structure and how people approach those things, it can be really real eye-opening. So I think like the benefit of something like college versus maybe
The
like a few classes or just taking some courses is that you are going to be
Yep.
exposed, and the electives
The
are
less
sometimes like the
obvious.
best parts.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
so
And that's
you.
actually one of the funky things about these language models, and I talk about that in my new lecture, is
Hmm.
that we kind of pick up on bad writing,
Hmm.
it has a funky smell, and we know to stay away from this. And these models really up the quality that mediocre writers can spew, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So I'm actually quite afraid, not just of a sheer amount of fake news and misinformation just flooding social networks, but also the
Hmm.
fact that people are not going to have that as a way to assess what the quality of the information that they're getting. The fact that you have this really well written stuff that can be totally nonsense.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the code that you get, you really, I mean, I think it's good because sometimes with Copilot, especially like one of the things that you get is a bunch of different ways of doing the same thing
Mhm.
as suggestions, and sometimes that sparks like, oh, I wasn't thinking about that, or
Yeah.
I forgot to do this in the code that I was writing. So that's pretty amazing.
And
I
with
learned.
Copilot, you can kind of look through it, but I'm talking about actually generating, news stories, right?
Oh,
And all of a
oh, oh,
sudden
okay.
they sound really good. They sound like news stories.
Yeah, yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
right now you have like journalism, and only part of it you can tell it's good journalism because it's well written. And
Right,
now
right.
these models can write pretty
Pretty good
darn
stuff.
realistic sounding stuff.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
and that's
Yeah.
one less filter that we have to know what it is we're getting, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So much to learn from school and critical learning. So there's a
yeah,
couple of more questions that people have here. Let's see. So yeah, somebody says that they're hoping to do some networking with Ronnie and Ray to continue career. Yeah, keep it here. Send us some
yeah, for
notes.
sure.
Make sure you hit the notification icon on the like that I showed earlier, and just write to us, and we'll reply to
Yeah,
you. So yeah, cool
I when I
stuff.
get mentions of the courses, I have like a time in my day when I try to give shout outs to people
Right,
that
right.
post the course certificates. And if you write me, I'll try, I'll
Yeah,
answer you any
we're pretty
questions for
friendly.
sure. Yeah.
Cool. So thank you so much for your time. I think we're a little bit over time already. So thank you so
Thank
much
you. Thank you
again.
so much, Ray.
So much
And
fun. I appreciate your
thanks everybody
availability.
for tuning in for
Yeah,
sure.
that's super fun. I am so happy that I finally decided to go ahead and do these things, and I hope to see a lot more of them. I learned so much from you, Ronnie. I mean, just
Yeah,
I was doing
likewise.
the links for the course, and I'm like, holy cow! I've never. Usually, I try to have resources for people, so we gave them a ton. So I'm really thankful, and
Cool,
I hope
cool.
to see you soon. Well, take care.
Thanks. Nice seeing you again, Ray.
Take care. Bye bye.